Welcome. Good morning. As always, no matter who you are, no matter where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. We always begin this class in prayerful silence. So if it helps to close your eyes, you can do that. Take a few deep breaths just to be here. And our period of silence like this is an affirmation and a reminder that we live in the heart of sacred mystery, and that this sacred mystery seeks to find expression through who we are and how we live. So may grace be in our head and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in our mouths and in our speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. May grace be at our ends and in our departing. And may what we do in this time and space to contribute to our growth in freedom, love, patience, compassion, and contribute to the well-being of all people everywhere. Amen. So one of the great perks that I get here at St. Paul's is that I get my own office. And my office is on what I call the grounded floor, because all of us who have offices there are grounded people. We used to call that floor the dungeon, because that's what it looked like, and that's what it was. So I love my office because no one comes there unless they have a reason to come. I'm not in the way of bypass traffic. And usually if I'm in the office and I'm busy, I've got a sign on my door that says, "In session, please do not disturb." But if I'm not in session, I usually leave the door propped open like this. And the door was in this not completely shut position the other day, when there was a gentle knock at the door, and I got up from my desk. This is my desk. Actually, this is not my desk. This is Einstein's
I knew
desk.
you were going to say that.
However,
I was like, who would you draw upon to make your desk like?
However, those of you who have actually seen my desk, either in our home or in person, it pretty much looks like this. It pretty much looks like this. All right.
Yeah.
At any rate, there stood a man at the door. There was a knock on the door, and there stood a man at the door. And I want you to create this experience in your imagination. You're in the office. You're not expecting anyone. There's a knock at the door, and you go to the door, and you open it, and there stands a man.
No.
So I happened to be free, and I invited him into the office, and I said, "Tell me your name, and why have you come to see me?" Now, you got this picture in your mind? Okay. So he says, "My name is Justice. I'm the justice spoken of in the Judeo-Christian tradition and in your courts of law." Now, I want you to imagine, what did justice look like? How was justice dressed? What did his energy level seem like? How was his gait when he walked into the office? That's one of the things psychologists always put in psychological evaluations about somebody's gait. Did he seem depressed? Did he seem full of energy? Why had justice come to me for therapy?
when I read our text, this is the picture that conjured in my imagination. And to me, that you've painted justice as a man tells us everything we need to know. And I'm not disregarding the maleness of justice. I'm saying that we've treated justice as strictly masculine, a retributive thing in our courts, in our culture, rather than as reparative action. I spoke some weeks ago about the kind of masculine, feminine aspects of justice, and procedural justice, which I talked about, is important. That's the way the law is enacted. But it points to process rather than purpose. And the picture I got was that justice has lost his purpose.
Well, Justice sat down and Justice started talking, and he talked in a voice that was tired. He was defensive. He was conflicted. And it is as if he had been carrying the weight of an identity that didn't fit for a very long time. So he confessed to me that he was feeling alienated, that he was feeling misunderstood, and that he was feeling disconnected from his original purpose. So I said, "Can you elaborate?" And he said, "Well, I was once meant to guide people toward fairness and to help communities flourish. But now I feel mechanical and bureaucratic. Mostly, I am used by the powerful against those who have less power. I'm used by the wealthy against those who have fewer resources. I'm not used for justice. I'm used for revenge. I'm mainly used to hurt people. I feel used and I feel hollow. People no longer gather around me with respect and reverence. Instead, they approach me with cynicism and ulterior motives. I feel I've become a tool rather than a teacher, a weapon rather than a guide. I'm burdened with demands I was never designed to carry. Moral, political, economic. I feel lost. I'm tired. I no longer know how to connect with my true identity, my deeper self. I feel used, not loved. Can you help me?"
I think this is when Mrs. Justice says, "Come here, sweetie." Yes. Yes, I can help you. And of course, Justice is tired. How could he not be? As I said, in our society, justice has this tone of anger, fear, definitely revenge, as you mentioned. And that's not who you truly are. But to remember ourselves to justice, we need to connect with the purpose. And that is to support rather than to react. Substantive justice, which is that sort of feminine arm of justice, holistically changes people's lives, not just through the application of the law, but in the law itself. So the law starts out as just. I made that case a few weeks back that substantive justice is inherently feminine because it's rooted in compassion, which shares its root with womb in Hebrew. It sees possibility in people and in systems. I love how Brian Stevenson, who truly is a modern day hero, puts it. He says, "Each one of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done." If the justice system started with that premise, it would be 2,000 times more compassionate than it currently is if we saw people as people. Mr. Justice needs his feminine counterpart so that he doesn't have to do this work alone. I thought a lot about the image of justice and how she is almost always pictured, a blindfolded woman wielding a sword and a scale. This is a mural in downtown Houston. The blindfold represents impartiality, so justice is blind. The sword represents the power of the one holding justice, and the scales represent balance. As a symbol, justice embodies the importance of protecting and defending all citizens with dignity and equity. If we're using the image of justice or Jesus in the Beatitudes as speaking to a large crowd in the proverbial Sermon on the Mount, I think we both agree that that maybe wasn't a moment, but a compilation of teachings that were described in a moment. He's talking to people who may not agree with him. He's talking to a wide crowd, a ragtag group of folks from every walk of life and across the political spectrum. The difference is not how he tailors his speaking or his teaching. He doesn't tailor it to fit certain audiences. He speaks his truth to the whole audience. The difference is in how it is received, how people hear it, and then what they do with it. That's true even 2,000 years later. If we listen, as verse 6 we'll get to the reading of it, in the Beatitudes say, with a good appetite worked up for righteousness, which in this case does not mean being morally correct, but it's something much holier. Righteousness in this case is a longing for an ethic of care in the systems we abide in. If we listen with those ears, we're on the right track. But if we listen with fear and scarcity, like there's not enough for everyone, then we're likely operating with a mindset of competition and retributive justice. How we hear what Jesus says has a lot to do with how we see. One of my favorite theologians and philosophers, Teilhard de Chardin, who himself is flawed, wrote, "Seeing, we might say that the whole of life lies in that one verb. If not ultimately, then at least essentially, see or perish. To a higher degree, this is the human condition." He's not talking about the literal act of seeing, but expanded consciousness. How do we see on the inside? In our society, I perceive that we tend to see through an us versus them perspective. Our identity is often formed by our differences, how we're different from one another, rather than from our sameness. And we often see our personal differences as better than other people's differences. The way I'm different is much better than the way that you are different. So we have this kind of we're right, they're wrong mentality. And this binary way of thinking is actually what got Jesus killed. While I don't advocate for relativity, meaning everything goes or whatever floats your boat, I think we need a moral compass. I do, however, advocate for a deep reverence for diversity. It's necessary environmentally, it's necessary in our own systems. Evolution is sustained by diversity. And diversity, in turn, is sustained by a deep commitment to interconnection.
So I was talking to a really good friend of mine who does not attend these gatherings. He is a profoundly spiritual person, but he's not religious, has no religious background, no religious training. And he asked me, he said, what are you doing in ordinary life these days? And I said that for a period of time, for 3 times I've asked Holly Hudley if she would sit with me as we taught our way through the Beatitudes. And he said, Beatitudes? What are they? How do you explain to somebody who doesn't know about the Bible anything about what the Beatitudes are? Although that's not a bad thing to call them. So I told him that the Beatitudes were some verses that began what is known as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. What's Matthew? So we had a mini religious literacy lesson. There are 4 books or writings in the beginning of the Christian collective. Actually, 3 of them are narratives of Jesus. One of them is a poetic, parabolic teaching. And in the first one, in Matthew, there are 3 chapters, chapters 5, 6, and 7, that are referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. And the first part of that are verses called the Beatitudes. So this collection of verses begins with the word blessed, which in Latin is translated blessed are you. It's likely blessed is not the best translation of what Jesus had in mind. Even the word blessed can have negative connotations. Pardon me. I grew up in the South. My mother, when she saw somebody who was unfortunate looking in her opinion, or really overweight, or dressed inappropriately, my mother would just say, "Oh, bless her heart."
We know that has an entirely other meaning in the South, right?
So the Beatitudes, there are 9 of them. And they are broken down into 3 things. The first 3 have to do with humility. And the reason I've asked Holly to do this with me is that all the scholars agree that what is prominent in the Beatitudes is the feminine aspect of them, what they carry from the feminine point of view. And we don't usually treat that. So the first is humility. That is the openness that one would have that opens one to the experience or gift of grace. So we dealt with that 2 weeks ago. Then the second 3 have to do with justice, which is what we're talking about today. And then in 2 weeks, the 3 that we will deal with have to do with peace. So here they are. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink and the best meal you will ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourself cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, that is your mind and your heart, put right. And then you can see God on the outside.
It's funny how I respond differently to the text when we're talking versus when we're writing or talking on Zoom. Is that the consistent move between the outer and the inner world in the sets of Beatitudes, that there's a doing and then there's a being, a way of internalizing. So inner work is necessary to embodying the Beatitudes. I'm going to skip through most of you probably know this Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I love this image that I came across because I hadn't seen it written in exactly this way, but Maslow describes a hierarchy of needs in which we move from our physiological or biological needs to psychological and spiritual fulfillment. So we move from I am secure, I have everything I need, to I am realized. I've never seen it written exactly that way. And the thing about his model is that achieving our highest potential is dependent on having or getting our basic needs met. One must happen in front of the other. It is also an individual model for the single human, based on individual rights, privileges, and achievements. It's based in some way on procedural justice. I bet that most of you do not know what you see on your right, my left, is the Blackfoot Indian wisdom. Maslow's work is actually based on this wisdom, and he lived with them for a period of time in the 1930s. The first shared value among the tribe and among many First Nations people is that everyone's basic needs are just going to be met. That it's not the task of the individual coming into the world to meet their own needs, but that's the community's responsibility to the individual. They're a given. It's not a level of achievement. This is so hard for us who have been raised in an individualistic, capitalist, kind of bootstraps, DIY type of society to really grasp. The Blackfoot simply saw that everyone was deserving and had dignity, and they deserved care from the get-go. So their pyramid, which is not actually a hierarchy, but the pyramid itself is representative of a teepee, which is a structure whose crossbars point heavenward. So there's a symbol in the teepee as well. The community says that, so the teepee begins with self-actualization. They say you are born being yourself. And the community says, we got you. You're safe here. Your needs are met. Now go be who you're meant to be. This stage is undergirded by a belief that we are who we are, no more or no less. We're credentialed at the start. Selfhood is not something you earn. In their ritualistic culture and sense of connectedness, lots of rites of passage in traditional earth-based cultures, is designed to connect to place and to the expression of self in the world. The second tier, which you see here, is community actualization. Edgar Villanueva, I actually recommend this book. If you are a person who has wealth and gives it away, this book is so good to read. He offers a quote of just how ingrained this community actualization piece is in First Nations people. He says, from a quote from a Native American, "They told me that they don't have a word for poverty. The closest thing they had as an explanation for poverty was to be without family, which is basically unheard of. They were saying it is a foreign concept that someone could be so isolated and without any sort of safety net or family structure or a sense of kinship, of belonging, that they would be suffering from poverty. There's also a belief that you are spiritually impoverished if you do not tend to the community with generosity in some way. So there's a reciprocity. The ultimate tier in the Blackfoot pyramid is cultural perpetuity, which entails keeping each person fed, living in harmony with the land, and minimizing conflict. Enshrined in this tier is the concept of the 7 generations, meaning one's actions are informed by 7 generations prior, and every action then is considered to how it will affect 7 generations in the future, constantly going forward and backward. What have my ancestors taught me about this? What will my actions do to the people coming after me? So it's a cosmic sense of belonging. And even Maslow, later in his life, when he critiqued his own work, came to see that self-actualization was not enough, that we cannot do this work alone, and we cannot become who we are in isolation. One of the biggest issues in psychology, or at least I think how it is conducted in the West and even in spiritual direction, is that it's often self-referential. We don't often have conversations with people about, and how is the world, and how is your community, and how is your closest tiers impacting your sense of self. The best we do is in family systems. I'd like to think, however, that what Jesus is talking about is a 7 generations type of justice. Consider who came before, consider who's coming after. And in this regard, all people are held at their highest level.
Now, if you all are still paying attention.
Why'd you say that after I finished?
Because Richard Rohr says that there's one way to guarantee.
I think your mic's off again because you cleared your throat.
I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. The one way to guarantee not to have a crowd is to say you're going to talk about justice and peace. And that's what we're talking about. So the word justice comes from a French word, which is borrowed from Latin, which most words are. And the word justice meant originally to have a proper fit. And it was used originally about whether one's clothing or armor was a proper fit. Was it just? Was the fit just? And it came to mean that which is equitable and that which is just. So it was the concept of justice that led to what Carl Jaspers call the first axial age. I don't have time to go into the origin of the first axial age now, but it was a time when at 7 discretely different places on the globe, without internet or any communication, because this happened around the time of the Hebrew prophets, Buddha, Lao Tse, other things were happening. There arose this awareness among human beings that was a shift in consciousness called the first actual age. And that first actual age has at its root the belief that we should treat other people like we want to be treated. That was new in human consciousness at this time. And it revolutionized how people related to one another, how warring tribes that had been warring related to one another, and it ushered in a period of relative peace among humans. This summer, while taking our summer break, we made a most disappointing trip to England. And it was disappointing because the day that we got there, we were diagnosed with COVID. So we spent days isolated in a room, and all the great excursions and side trips that we wanted to take, we didn't get to. And even when we had the energy even when we were able to get out, we didn't have the energy to do what we wanted to do. However, we did get to walk around Lincoln. You know what Lincoln is known for? Well, there's Lincoln Castle. There's a cathedral that took a couple hundred years to build. 6,000 people. Pretty big place. And at Lincoln Castle, we walked around the grounds, and on the day we were there, they were having a family affair, family event. And kids were there, families were there. They were having falcons, those birds. What are the birds that fly out and come back?
Falcons.
Falcons. They were having falcons fly away and do things and come back, and they were having fire eaters and jugglers and jousting and all these things. And in a building over to the left, we walked all the way around the walls of the castle, which took a while. On a building over to the left, you go in and you go down and down and down, and guess what's there? The Magna Carta.
In the dungeon.
The Magna Carta was signed in Lincoln, England. It was great. The Magna Carta was signed by King John in 1215. It's a couple of years right before I was born. So you know the Magna Carta is one of the most influential documents in Western history. And one of the main points of the Magna Carta is that the king's power is not unlimited. The king was subject to the law just like everybody else. And he agreed to restrictions of arbitrary taxation and imprisonment. And this is the document that laid the foundation for the constitutional government that we are supposed to enjoy today. It directly influenced our Constitution. It directly influenced our Bill of Rights. And one of the main clauses adopted by the founders of this country is that no one can be arrested, punished, or have their property taken unless it is done through a fair, legal, just process, either by a trial by peers or established by law. So in the Magna Carta are the words also adopted by the United States: to no one will we sell, to no one deny or delay right or justice. So under the rule of law, there are specified persons who are empowered to use force on behalf of the state in specified circumstances against persons who are engaged in specified activities. That is to say, There are laws that restrain government officials from engaging in violent acts against citizens. You watch the news, right? So we have moved into a territory where criminals are people who anger or cross our president or object to his will. The New York Times recently interviewed 50 members of the Washington, D.C. legal establishment, men and women who have worked as high-level officials for every president since Ronald Reagan. And the group was equally divided between Democrats and Republicans. And all of them are appalled by what's going on in this country right now. One's quoted as saying, "What's happening is anathema to everything we've ever stood for in the Department of Justice." He went on to say, "Most of the guardrails inside and outside the Justice Department," this talk is about justice, "which in the past counterbalanced executive power, have all but fallen away." When checks and balances no longer check or balance, we have something other than justice being done.
Mm-hmm. Seems like lately, on a daily basis, one of my favorite poems by the mystic poet Hafiz is just constantly in my mouth. It says, "First, the fish needs to say, something ain't right about this camel ride, and I am feeling so damn thirsty." So first we need to notice if something ain't right. It is so strange that many of us, I think especially those who are protected by having our basic needs met, can go through our days feeling relatively unscathed by the political turmoil gripping our country right now. It's easy then to think, well, things aren't that bad, to put our blinders on and kind of keep going. But y'all, something ain't right. We need to employ some kind of broader view, some broader, maybe 7 generations type of seeing, so that our social bonds and our sense of civility can be restored. And they've been tenuous, but they're further eroding right now, and we're truly in this kind of collective moment of what Jung called holding the opposites. Our normal reality is taking place against an abnormal backdrop. So we're holding those tensions. And in that tension, there is growth, there's opportunity, an opportunity to see with greater depth and understanding. I think the cracks are pretty vast and wide right now, but to quote a couple other mystics, Leonard Cohen and Rumi, the cracks are where the light gets in, and the light reveals the truth.
So what Jesus is saying to these people that these blessings were first delivered to is what's being said to us right now, right here. You're here. Look around. Everywhere there are people. I'm thinking about what happened yesterday and all the marches and all the demonstrations that took place. Some say the most massive ever in the history of the country in some places yesterday. There are people who are, despite being mired in this period of national darkness, refuse to give up. Refuse to give up on the thought that we can do better. There are countless people who never lose hope that the values we learned in the best of times are what can reclaim our world from the worst of times. In her encouraging book, The Time Is Now, A Call for Uncommon Courage, Sister Joan Chittister writes, "How do we get out of the swamp we are in? by confronting it. How? Truthfully. But what will that take? A model, a vision, a commitment, courage, and you. I grew up, I know there are some who would say I have not yet reached that point. But I grew up in a world that I was told, and I never doubted, would last. And I now live in a world, actually we're steeped like a tea bag in hot water, in a world that defies everything I was taught to expect. I think that my biggest exercise these days comes from shaking my head in disbelief. The fact is that we live in a polyglot place where there are all kinds of people who all want the same thing. We all want the same thing. Everybody wants an ordered society. Everybody wants a good future for their children. Everybody wants to make a decent living that provides the basics of life and a chance to enjoy those things. Everybody wants the opportunity to become their best. And until recently, I thought everybody wanted a government that exists for the good of all citizens, that protects rather than oppresses any people. And that seems not to be the case. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is in essence, and we don't have time to do this right now, but the Sermon on the Mount was a construction by whoever put together the Gospel of Matthew, and it is absolutely brilliant in its composition. Jesus didn't go up on a mountain one day and give these 3 chapters. That didn't happen that way, but whoever took the collective sayings of Jesus and put them together in this way did a genius job. The Sermon on the Mount, which we're going to spend some more time with, is a compilation of the essence of Jesus' teaching. And the Beatitudes is a compilation of the essence of the Sermon on the Mount. These 9 verses. You get them, you got the gospel. And they are about humility, empathy. They are about justice, and they are about peace. And they all involve compassion and cooperation and equality. One of the things the Beatitudes are saying to anyone who reads them is that faith is invalid until we are living it. Now, I am hesitant to use the phrase will of God because it's so abused and it's so misunderstood. To me, the will of God, and this is what the Beatitudes are about, the will of God is that all people flourish, that all creation flourish. The will of God is not the same as patriotism. To follow Jesus is to live in the present for the sake of a future that, as Holly said, may not be our own. One of the reasons I have come up with a phrase to describe myself is a trans-religious person. Is as much as I have benefited from and love and cherish organized religion, sadly, it has failed in its prophetic obligation and maybe even in its opportunity to be relevant. Because sadly, we have educated people to think that going to church is the same as being religious. Going to church is not the same as following Jesus. Now, the church in which I grew up, and by the way, I am teaching in this class what that church taught me. I modified some of it, but that church taught me that church and patriotism or church and politics couldn't have anything to do with each other. Jesus would never agree with that. Never agree with that. So when people ask me, what should we do? My answer is at the core of spiritual maturity, following Jesus means that we too must do something to redeem our battered, beaten world, battered and beaten from the racism and greed that is smothering us. Following Jesus means that we each are called to be so much a prophetic presence that our corner of the world becomes better because we've been in it.
There's so much to say about that. The other day, a friend of mine sent me a meme comparing Darth Vader, the fatherless Star Wars villain, to Voldemort, the fatherless Harry Potter villain. So there's something here about justice and fatherlessness, that when we don't have the loving, protective father, we're doing justice badly. And there's something to wrestle with, I think, again, in this masculine-feminine aspect of justice. How do we reconcile ourselves to the two, to the inner and the outer? Darth was, of course, interested in intergalactic domination. He blew up several planets, whereas Voldemort was interested in revenge. He was driven by revenge. And if I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, don't know if y'all knew that. It's up there with baseball for me. But Voldemort's wrath was personal and targeted. It was revenge-oriented. I think our current administration is following the path of Voldemort, targeting anyone who stands in their way, who disagrees. It's a misaligned perception of justice. The avenger sees their actions as a restoration of order, while the avenged perceive them as excessive. This often leads to greater violence and unrest in the larger system. It's not a lasting justice, but it's rather a thin substitute for it. The road to whole-making justice is long and arduous and continuous. We're so mired in this one way of doing things that it's become reflexive, I think, so that living justly, walking humbly, really comes down to whether or not we have the will to challenge and change the status quo, including how the status quo benefits us. Part of doing justice is to observe the hopelessness in our current situation and to choose hope and perseverance anyway. It's a nevertheless kind of justice. I think of it like a never-ending song that we're going to be singing from one generation to the next. Perhaps this is what we've received from the 7 previous. There are tribes who, when a young person messes up, instead of outcasting them and putting them away, sings them back into the fold as many times as it takes. I'm reminded of one of my favorite songs by U2, 40. It's taken from Psalm 40, which is equal parts a thanksgiving and a lamenting psalm. It gets back to what we talked about a few weeks ago, the importance of grieving injustice in order to do justice. So the refrain goes like this, and before I try to sing it, I'm going to say my voice is a little scratchy, kind of like yours, but it's for different reasons, because I don't think you were at the same youth basketball game I was at last night, where, speaking of justice, I did yell at a ref for not calling a foul on a kid, for pushing my kid across the floor. So if I'm off tune, just know I was trying to do justice last night. Anyways, this refrain goes like this. If you know it, you can sing with me. I will sing a new song. I will sing a new song. How long to sing this song? How long must we sing this song? How how long to sing this song? And it goes on and on and on. This band, and I've been to as many concerts as I could have gone to of theirs, traditionally ends their concerts with this song. And so the audience is left singing as they walk off. So we're still singing.
So, being on the wayless way, informed by the life and teachings of Jesus, means, whatever else it means, being a prophetic presence in the here and now, in the places where we live, with the influence that we have. And I have seen, as I said earlier, that in the kingdoms of this world, it's possible to say, I believe in Jesus, and lead a life that has absolutely nothing to do with the teachings of Jesus. One of our U.S. senators this week said that ICE was, quote, doing the Lord's will. Next week, I'll show you the photograph of this, which I got from Diana Butler Bass, shooting a pastor who was in a clerical collar, with arms upraised in prayer, in the face with pepper bullets, is not something I think Jesus would look at and say, way to go. But Christian nationalists are doing that. Jose Antonio Vargas, in a stunning piece writing entitled Dear America, Notes of an Undocumented Citizen, reminds us that just because something is legal doesn't make it right. He writes, apartheid was legal, the Holocaust was legal, slavery was legal, colonialism was legal. Legality is a matter of power, not justice. So, to me, someone who is Christian seeks to have, as Paul put it, the mind of Christ, and who works to take that stance with the faith that having that mind of Christ will not leave us unchanged. So if I'm reading these teachings of Jesus that we're looking at correctly, I see him looking at life as it is, hard for many, unfair for most, and he's seeking to expand it. That people live, they're able to flourish. He called it life abundant. And he refused to accept a vision that tomorrow is limited by the teachings of yesterday. Jesus is not interested in rebuilding the past. He's not interested in restoring the present. Rather, he had a restless, unyielding vision of tomorrow and called those who heard him into this way of thinking and living. And those who heard him had to choose. And that's what later in the Sermon on the Mount we'll get to. Whether they're going to surrender to the prevailing culture or whether they're going to go another way. Whether they will follow the wayless way or whether they will agree to a path of injustice. This teaching is about justice today. And the fact is that no one is too busy, too old, too limited by any of the other excuses we have who cannot in some way appropriate these teachings and contribute to justice and compassion in the world. All of us can do that. And what the world needs most of all from each of us right now is a commitment to that kind of spirituality. One of Jesus' most memorable teachings is, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. This is not my notes, but I had a seminary professor who said, Jesus got it wrong. He said, it really should read, you shall know the truth and the truth will make you mad. Here's the way Eugene Peterson translates that verse. If you stick with this, living out what I tell you, you are my disciples for sure. Then you will experience for yourselves the truth, and the truth will set you free. How many of you know who Steve Garnis Holmes is? Anybody you know? Anybody else there? Why don't you look him up and get on his free website. Free, you get his stuff every day. He is his website is called Unfolding Light.
It's beautiful.
I just love that title. Wish I'd thought of it. I will.
You'll borrow it.
I will think of it and take credit for it someday. So, in a bit of synchronicity this week, and he doesn't send these out every day, but in a bit of synchronicity, I got this from him this week, and I sent him an email and said, I'm going to use this Sunday in class. And he wrote this poem called Persist. And I want to offer it to you as something that you can take away from here today. The emperor wants to get between you and the truth, to pry loose your loyalty, kidnap your belief. His minions will tell you when to be joyful, what to regret. At the microphone, desperate clowns, they will mock the truth. Daily, in little moments, we trade what we know for what somebody feels. Wisdom is open to truth, but not blackmail. Persuaded, yes, but never swayed. Your last freedom is to know what you know, to marry, forsaking all others, the truth. Your greatest test is the opportunity to be truthful when others don't want to hear. When times are unfavorable, the atmosphere harsh. Persist. The truth, your beloved, will stay faithful to the end. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step. I hope you're staying for lunch today, and so if you'll clear up out and give us a chance to settle, and I hope you sign up for Feed the Hungry. See you here.